Mark Laita never expected the world to dissect every word he said about the Whittakers. Yet with every interview, every live stream, every unscripted moment, the internet collected his statements like puzzle pieces. People began calling them confessions, as if each sentence was a key to a deeper truth hidden in the hills of West Virginia. What began as a willingness to answer questions turned into a vault of details the public now revisits, questions, and reinterprets. 7 of those details stand out: misunderstood, controversial, or deeply human. The first detail traces back to the original meeting, the moment Mark admitted that he was warned not to approach the family. People told him the dogs were dangerous, the relatives unpredictable, the atmosphere volatile. Some told him outright not to go at all. But he went anyway, guided by curiosity and a photographer's instinct. When he later shared that he'd been told to bring protection, the internet reframed it as a confession. Mark had always known he was entering a world that the outside community considered unsafe. He has since reiterated that he never intended to sensationalize the family. He simply followed the story as he found it. But that single admission, that he went where he'd been warned not to, became the first, shocking detail people claimed he had exposed. The second detail emerged when he explained why he didn't publish the Whittaker photos he took in 2004. He said the images felt too raw, too real, too intimate. For 16 years, he kept them locked away. To him, it was respect. To the internet, it felt like secrecy. When Mark later released the videos in 2020, some viewers assumed he had known all along that the family's story would go viral. But he repeatedly stated that he held onto the early photos because he didn't yet know how to tell their story responsibly. His hesitation has been twisted by some into an admission that he was releasing something he knew would shock the world. But his own words show a different picture. Someone who hesitated precisely because he understood the gravity of the story long before the internet did. The third detail surfaced when Mark explained the family tree. He once said that trying to trace their genealogy was nearly impossible because the documentation simply wasn't there. No birth certificates, no formal records, only fragments of oral history the family shared in their own way. Yet when he described the historical pattern of cousin marriages that shaped the Whittakers' genetic reality, people treated the information as a revelation he had uncovered through investigation. In truth, Mark had only repeated what locals had already known for generations. The family had lived in such extreme isolation that inbreeding had become part of their lineage. But because he was the first person to present this openly to a global audience, his explanation was received like a shocking exposé. The fourth detail emerged from something smaller, almost incidental, Mark acknowledging how difficult it could be to communicate with certain family members. He mentioned that Ray and Timmy responded through grunts or gestures, and that those interactions were meaningful even without spoken language. To viewers, it felt like a startling revelation. These were adults living in silence, communicating through sounds that outsiders interpreted as animalistic or alarming. But to Mark, this wasn't shocking. It was simply the way the family lived. He has repeatedly spoken about learning to interpret their cues, their routines, their ways of showing emotion. Yet the internet turned that honest admission into a dramatic detail about the mysterious Whittakers, a detail that often overshadowed their humanity. The fifth detail grew out of a subject Mark didn't intend to focus on at all: the hostility from neighbors. He revealed more than once that locals had mixed feelings about his presence. Some supported him. Some told him to leave. Some confronted him angrily. And in one infamous account, he described being approached by a man with a shotgun who wanted him off the property. This moment became one of the most replayed quotes from his interviews, treated as a confession of danger surrounding the family. But Mark has clarified multiple times that the man wasn't threatening the Whittakers, he was protecting them from outsiders. The internet misinterpreted that clarity, framing the moment as a hint of darker secrets buried in the community. In reality, it reflected the tension between protecting privacy and confronting exploitation. The sixth detail emerged not from Mark's words, but from his silence. Whenever viewers asked who fathered certain children, or why certain disabilities existed in the family, Mark avoided speculation. He emphasized repeatedly that he only presents what the family shares and that he does not assign labels or diagnoses. Yet his refusal to speculate became, ironically, one of the most frequently cited confessions online. People argued that if Mark wasn't naming fathers or explaining timelines, he must be hiding something. In truth, he was doing the opposite, refusing to fabricate information where none existed. But the vacuum he left behind became a breeding ground for rumor, and the restraint he practiced was interpreted as revelation by absence. The seventh detail, and the one people revisit most often, is Mark's admission that documenting the Whittakers changed him. He has said in interviews that meeting them forced him to confront the fragility of human dignity. It made him question the ethics of filming vulnerable people. It made him think about his role not only as an observer but as a participant in the story. Many viewers see this as his most powerful confession, not about the family, but about himself. The videos made him rethink the line between storytelling and intrusion. They made him reckon with the weight of showing a family to the world without shielding them from the consequences of that exposure. This final detail is the one audiences misunderstand most deeply. They often claim it proves that Mark regrets the videos or believes he made a mistake. But that is not what he says. Instead, he speaks frequently about balance, the tension between revealing truths that matter and protecting people who did not choose the spotlight. This tension isn't a confession, it's a responsibility. And yet, to many viewers, it remains the most shocking revelation of all, that the story isn't just about the Whittakers. It's also about the man holding the camera, and how the truth changes not only those who watch the video, but the one who records it. The idea of 7 shocking details is something the internet loves to latch onto. But the real details, the real confessions, are quieter, more human, less scandalous than people expect. They point not toward hidden horrors or sensational secrets, but toward a complicated reality shaped by poverty, isolation, and the gaze of millions of strangers. As part 1 ends, the question isn't just what Mark has exposed, it's what the world has chosen to see, ignore, exaggerate, or misunderstand. And with every comment, every theory, every clip re-uploaded across social platforms, the story expands in ways Mark never intended. What happens next will depend on how the world handles the details yet to come, not the ones invented for shock, but the ones rooted in truth. Comment below what you think. The more Mark Laita spoke publicly about the Whittakers, the more the internet dissected every sentence, often pulling meaning from places he never intended. What many people now call his confessions are really clarifications, reflections, or moments of honesty that grew into myths once the world got hold of them. Part 2 begins with the detail that the audience twisted the hardest, the belief that Mark knew more than he was telling. One of the statements that continues to echo across interviews is Mark admitting he didn't know what he was walking into during his first visits. He said plainly that he did not understand the family's full history or the degree of their isolation. In his own words, he described it as stepping into another world, one where the rules of conventional society had never taken root. To him, it was an observation. To viewers, it became a confession that there were layers he had not shown, stories left off camera, truths he hadn't revealed. The internet interpreted his surprise as the confirmation of a deeper mystery, as though he had stumbled upon something too disturbing to document. The reality was far simpler. Mark was describing the shock any outsider would feel witnessing generational poverty and genetic isolation up close. Yet the internet thrives on ambiguity. When Mark mentioned that some Whittaker relatives reacted with suspicion toward him, the audience immediately assumed they had something to hide. What he was actually describing was the normal reaction of people living in isolation who had been taught to distrust strangers. Over time, he explained that the family did not understand why cameras were there, why people cared, or why the world suddenly wanted to see them. This confusion was interpreted as secrecy. Viewers insisted Mark was hinting at a deeper truth, that the Whittakers themselves were protecting information. This reinterpretation placed a pressure on him that he never anticipated, a responsibility to address rumors he did not create. Every refusal to feed speculation was treated as a clue. The unwillingness to speculate became, paradoxically, the fuel for speculation. When Mark said he wouldn't discuss paternity theories, people claimed he was protecting someone. When he refused to diagnose disabilities on camera, they said he was withholding information. When he redirected focus toward poverty and neglect, viewers insisted he was avoiding the real story. This dynamic grew more intense when Mark addressed the family's living conditions directly. In one interview, he expressed shock that they had survived as long as they did, given the absence of basic necessities like plumbing or consistent food supply. His emotional reaction, clearly rooted in empathy, was framed by viewers as something darker, as if he was hinting that the family had endured horrors he couldn't broadcast. But Mark has repeated the same truth. The tragedy of the Whittakers does not require embellishment. The reality is already devastating enough. The generational entrapment in poverty is itself the story. The next detail that viewers seized on was Mark's admission that filming the family had become emotionally difficult. He spoke about moments where he needed to step away, times when the suffering he witnessed weighed on him. He described Ray sitting on the porch, staring blankly into the distance. He talked about the silence inside the house, a silence heavy enough to feel physical. He mentioned how the family often didn't express emotion in ways outsiders expected. To Mark, these were moments of human vulnerability. To the internet, they became confessions. People claimed he was revealing that the family harbored trauma darker than anything he could publish. Others insisted he had seen abuse, violence, or conflict he wouldn't talk about. But nothing in his statements supported those interpretations. He was talking about emotional exhaustion, the toll of documenting poverty without the power to solve it. Yet the internet rarely accepts the mundane explanation when a dramatic one is available. Viewers assigned meaning to his pauses, tones, and facial expressions. They created secrets where none had been stated. Another detail that grew into a legend was Mark's description of the townspeople's reactions. He said some locals didn't like outsiders poking around. Others believed the Whittakers should be left alone. Some resented the attention. Some feared it would reflect poorly on the region. These comments were practical observations about community dynamics. But the internet reimagined them as coded warnings. People insisted Mark was alluding to a conspiracy of silence in Odd, West Virginia, as though the entire town was protecting a secret about the family. In reality, communities like Odd often resist outside scrutiny because rural poverty has long been treated as spectacle. Locals weren't hiding something, they were tired of being mocked. One of the most misinterpreted moments came when Mark described his relationship with the Whittakers over time. He said that the more he visited, the more comfortable they became. He observed their routines, learned their personalities, and found calm in their presence. This was a sentiment of connection, not confession. But audiences used it as evidence that he had learned deep secrets he wasn't sharing. Comment sections overflowed with claims that Mark must have uncovered hidden histories, dark incidents, or truths that would shock the world if revealed. Yet the truth was simply that he built a rapport with a family many had misunderstood. The sixth detail, one that still circulates heavily, came from Mark's reflections on consent. He spoke openly about the ethical complexity of filming people who cannot always articulate their choices. He said he relied on caregivers, guardians, and social structures to guide decisions. He said he believed the videos gave the Whittakers access to resources they otherwise wouldn't have had. He acknowledged the discomfort some viewers felt. These statements were interpreted as confessions of guilt. People argued that Mark was admitting he crossed ethical lines. But his reflections were about responsibility, not wrongdoing. He was acknowledging what all documentarians confront: the difficulty of telling vulnerable people's stories without exploiting them. The internet twisted this into a claim that Mark admitted regret. But he never said he regretted documenting the family, only that he recognized the weight of doing so. He spoke about balancing visibility and dignity, storytelling and protection. The idea that he made a confession of wrongdoing was created entirely by viewers who projected their discomfort onto him. The seventh detail, arguably the most impactful, came when Mark admitted the Whittakers changed how he viewed humanity. He said they reshaped his understanding of poverty, disability, and resilience. He described being moved by their closeness as a family, their ability to survive hardship, and their unconditional acceptance of each other. This deeply human statement became twisted by some into the belief that he was pointing toward a hidden truth he couldn't say explicitly. But in every interview, Mark's meaning is clear. The shocking part for him wasn't discovering secret scandals. It was discovering a form of resilience that defied the stereotypes people assign to families like the Whittakers. And this is where the public narrative diverges most dramatically from the truth. While some viewers want Mark to reveal sinister secrets, he consistently returns to a different message: that the real story lies in the everyday reality of a family surviving under extraordinary pressure. The shock, for him, isn't what the world assumes. It's that the world ignored them for so long, failed them for so long, and now consumes their lives through screens without understanding the cost. As Part 2 ends, the distance between Mark's words and the public's interpretations becomes clearer. What people call confessions are often misunderstandings, misread meanings, exaggerated claims, and assumptions fueled by sensationalism. The 7 shocking details are not proofs of hidden darkness, but examples of how quickly truth can warp when millions of eyes are searching for drama. The story continues, not in what Mark revealed, but in how the world chose to hear him. As Mark continued speaking publicly about the Whittakers, the gap between what he actually said and what the internet claimed he said grew wider. His words became raw material, reshaped into theories, assumptions, and accusations. The audience no longer heard him, they interpreted him. And interpretation became its own kind of truth. One of the most misrepresented details arose when Mark discussed how deeply isolated the Whittakers had been for decades. He explained that the family had lived with minimal interaction from the outside world, with very little access to basic systems like education, healthcare, and social services. His point was simple: this family lived in a pocket of America that almost felt forgotten. But online, his statement was twisted into something dramatic. People insisted he was implying that state authorities had ignored abuse. Others claimed he was hinting at hidden crimes. Some even suggested he was revealing that the Whittakers had been deliberately concealed by institutions. But none of those claims matched what Mark actually meant. When he spoke of isolation, he meant literal, physical isolation. A family living on a dirt road miles from town, in conditions that made outreach nearly impossible. He was describing poverty, not conspiracy. Yet because the internet heard isolation and thought cover-up, his genuine observation became another so-called confession in the growing mythology around the family. Another detail that spiraled out of control came from Mark's explanation of how unpredictable certain moments were during filming. He said that when he visited the family, he never knew what kind of interaction he would walk into. Some days the family was welcoming and warm. Other days they were distant or confused. The unpredictability reflected their emotional reality, not hidden volatility. But online audiences twisted his words into claims that he had witnessed violent outbursts or shocking events off camera. Commenters whispered that he must have seen something so disturbing he couldn't show it. They said his tone indicated fear. They said his hesitation proved that the Whittakers had secrets he did not dare reveal. But when Mark described unpredictability, he meant the natural rhythm of a family living with disabilities and communication barriers. He meant that filming wasn't scripted. He meant that being human around a camera is unpredictable for anyone, especially people unaccustomed to visitors. Still, the internet insisted he was admitting something dangerous. The next detail came from a simple yet powerful statement Mark made, that he sometimes left the Whittakers feeling emotionally overwhelmed. The internet latched onto that vulnerability like a spotlight. People said he was confessing guilt. Others claimed he regretted filming them. Some even argued he was revealing that the family had been harmed by the camera. But his meaning was clear in context. He felt the weight of documenting poverty up close. He felt the burden of telling stories that showed struggle without the power to fix it. His emotion was empathy, not admission. Yet online, empathy was misunderstood as evidence of wrongdoing. Another detail that audiences distorted involved the way Mark talked about the family's consent. He explained that the Whittakers, specifically the members able to give informed consent, expressed comfort with his presence. He also worked through caretakers and guardians when necessary. But because some members of the family cannot communicate in conventional ways, Mark acknowledged that gaining consent was a complex process. He emphasized that he always tried to handle the situation with respect and clarity. This honest discussion about ethics was transformed by some viewers into a confession that he wasn't sure whether the family truly understood the impact of the videos. But Mark never claimed they did not understand. He stated that they understood in their own way, within their own reality. They recognized him as a visitor, not a threat. They accepted him as someone who came with kindness. The notion that he was revealing guilt or missteps was another invention by an audience eager to interpret nuance as scandal. As speculation grew, so did the pressure on Mark to respond to rumors. When he addressed the growing flood of misinformation, he clarified that many of the online allegations about the Whittakers were not true. He said he tried to correct false assumptions when he could, but ultimately he couldn't control what millions of strangers chose to believe. People twisted even that into a confession that he was overwhelmed by the magnitude of the story. They said he was implying he had lost control. They claimed he was admitting that he didn't anticipate the explosion of attention. But what he was actually describing was a universal truth. The internet shapes stories in ways no individual can fully manage. Once millions of eyes latch onto a family, interpretation takes on a life of its own. He wasn't confessing loss of control, he was stating reality. Another detail that gained traction involved Mark's reflections on the family's living conditions after intervention from the state. He expressed sadness that the story had played a role, however indirectly, in drawing attention from authorities. And while he never said he caused the intervention, many people interpreted his sadness as a confession that he played a part in the separation of family members. In reality, his reflection was about responsibility and impact. Documenting suffering sometimes brings scrutiny from systems that had previously overlooked a family. That's not a confession, it's an acknowledgement of consequence. Still, many online voices insisted Mark was revealing hidden guilt. They claimed he knew his videos triggered state involvement. They argued that his sadness was proof he had crossed a moral line he could not undo. Yet Mark's own words countered those claims. He repeatedly emphasized that the family's needs were complex and long-standing, far predating his involvement. His sorrow was human compassion, not culpability. Then came perhaps the most misunderstood detail of all, Mark's admission that he felt connected to the Whittakers. He said he cared about them. He said he felt responsible for portraying them honestly. He said he wanted their lives to improve. But online, people twisted that into something darker. They argued that his emotional connection proved he had learned secrets too painful to share. They claimed he kept returning because he felt bound by unspoken truths. They suggested his care hinted at regret or fear. But none of that reflected what he actually meant. He cared because he spent real time with a real family. He cared because it is impossible to witness hardship without wanting better for the people living through it. His connection was not evidence of hidden revelations. It was evidence of empathy. Still, audiences chose the interpretation that made the story feel deeper, darker, and more dramatic. This brings us to the heart of Part 3, the understanding that the world created a version of Mark's story that does not match the reality he describes. The 7 shocking details people talk about online are often reflections of their own expectations, not confessions Mark actually made. The internet doesn't just watch stories, it rewrites them. It exaggerates what is ordinary. It turns hesitation into guilt, complexity into conspiracy, and compassion into confession. The truth is far quieter. Mark's details are not shocking because they expose hidden crimes or buried secrets. They are shocking because they reveal how vulnerable a family can become when their lives enter the public sphere. They show how quickly empathy can be drowned out by sensationalism. They show how stories reshape themselves when millions of people participate in telling them. And they show how easily a man trying to document reality becomes part of a narrative he did not write. The real revelations lie in what the world has done with Mark's words, not in the words themselves. As Part 3 ends, the question becomes, what responsibility do viewers have in interpreting a story that was never theirs to control? And how many details do we misinterpret simply because we want the story to be more dramatic than it is? Comment below what you think. As the story grew beyond anything Mark could have predicted, the world began treating his every word like evidence. Audiences searched for subtext, hidden meaning, or clues he never intended to plant. But in reality, the most revealing details he offered were not about the Whittakers. They were about the consequences of showing a vulnerable family to millions of strangers. The first consequence Mark acknowledged was the shift in how people viewed the Whittakers, not as individuals, but as symbols. He said that once the videos went viral, the family became something larger than themselves, something shaped by viewers' expectations rather than their own lived experience. The world wasn't looking at Ray or Timmy or Lorraine anymore. The world was looking at a representation of poverty, disability, and isolation. People projected their own beliefs and fears onto the family. They filled gaps in the story with guesses, rumors, or assumptions. To Mark, this transformation was one of the most painful outcomes of his work. It was not a confession of wrongdoing. It was a recognition that once a story becomes viral, no one controls it. Another consequence he spoke openly about was the flood of outsiders who came to the family's home. He said that after the videos gained popularity, the quiet road leading to the Whittakers' house turned into a tourist path. Cars rolled by every day. People shouted questions. Some arrived with gifts, others came with cameras. It was something Mark never intended. He admitted he felt responsible for the intrusion, not because he invited people to visit, but because he understood how exposure invites curiosity. His comments about this became twisted online, with some claiming he'd admitted guilt for inciting harassment. But what he actually expressed was sorrow that attention, even well-meaning attention, often comes with harm. He also described moments when the family reacted to their sudden notoriety. He said they didn't fully grasp the scale of their fame, but they felt the effects. They became more cautious around strangers. They became more protective of each other. Some became withdrawn. This was not a dramatic confession. It was a simple truth about how overwhelming the world becomes when millions of people suddenly know your name. Mark never claimed the family understood the internet. He claimed they understood change, and change made them uneasy. Another detail he addressed was how the narrative around the family began to shift without him. As more people created reaction videos, commentary channels, and conspiracy theories, the original purpose of documenting their lives became overshadowed by the noise. People debated whether the family was exploited, whether they were safe, whether they were hiding something. Every new video Mark uploaded was instantly pulled apart. Every silence was treated as suspicious. Every emotional moment was reinterpreted through the lens of scandal. Behind the scenes, Mark said, he felt the heaviness of this transformation. He knew the world wasn't just watching anymore. The world was judging. They judged him for filming. They judged the family for existing. They judged the community for allowing such living conditions. They judged the system for failing them. And judgment is rarely gentle. He also spoke about the internal conflict that grew inside him. On one hand, he believed documenting the family brought awareness to issues society often ignores. On the other hand, he understood that awareness can become exploitation when consumed irresponsibly. He never claimed he had the perfect answer. He acknowledged the complexity. He said that every time he uploaded a new video, he asked himself whether it was helping or hurting. This was not a confession of guilt. This was honesty about wrestling with the ethical weight of storytelling. Perhaps the most misunderstood detail Mark ever shared was his belief that the Whittakers deserved dignity above anything else. He said repeatedly that the family was not defined by their genetics, their history, or their poverty. They were defined by their humanity. He spoke about the moments the world never saw: Ray smiling quietly on the porch, Lorraine humming to herself, Timmy walking in circles with a rhythm that soothed him. These were not viral moments. They were real moments, moments that made Mark feel connected to the family beyond the camera. Yet even this sincerity became twisted by some viewers. People argued he was hiding the real truth behind emotional language. But the real truth was exactly what he said, that the Whittakers were people first, subjects second, and content last. His respect for them was the one constant the internet could never twist. As the story continued unfolding, Mark's public statements became less about the shock of what he saw and more about the responsibility of what he shared. He acknowledged that once a family becomes part of popular culture, they lose a piece of themselves. He understood that his lens shaped how the world perceived them. And he accepted that some people would always question his motives no matter how transparent he tried to be. But the most revealing detail, the one viewers rarely acknowledged, was that Mark never claimed to be the hero of the story. He never claimed to be the savior, the exposer, or the confessor. He claimed only to be a man documenting the lives of others, trying to show compassion in a world that often sensationalizes suffering. In the end, the 7 shocking details the world insisted he exposed were not secret revelations at all. They were reminders of the uncomfortable reality the Whittaker story forces us to confront. That poverty is overlooked until someone shines a camera on it. That disability is misunderstood until someone narrates it. That isolation is invisible until someone walks into it. That storytelling always comes with consequences, good, bad, and unpredictable. That the audience, not the storyteller, decides what becomes a confession. Mark's true confession was simple: the story changed him. The shocking details were never about what he uncovered. They were about what the world chose to see. Comment below what you think. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.